Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. The drug and money laundering cartel is threatened. They're losing control. No, not the Zetas or the Sonoma cartels, the banking cartels, the dozens of global banks printing money all day long through making loans and turning tricks, accounting tricks, that is. Stacey?
Max, well, you know, over the years, we've covered thousands and thousands of headlines of all the fraud that bankers are committing around the world. Thousands of them.
Thousands!
And one of the ways that they're able to participate in all the money laundering that they do is that they can print money. They can print money through issuing loans, so they have the cash to provide the laundromat for many of the criminal organizations around the world. So it's a bit rich, this next headline, because here we have a threat to that cartel, and that is Dutch bank's innovation chief dismisses Bitcoin. The head of innovation at ABN AMRO has said that Dutch state-owned bank wants to stay away from Bitcoin, but is interested in the blockchain technology. According to a report, Arjan van Os, the head of the bank's innovation center, cited the Bitcoin's association with drug trafficking and illicit activities as the reason behind the bank's decision to distance itself from the digital currency. Please note that, as the article pointed out, it's a state-owned bank because, of course, all the banks collapsed because of all the fraud behind all of their loans that they issued.
That's right. This bank collapsed. It's a state-owned bank. They were involved in massive fraud.
Well, we don't know about them because I've Googled it, and there's actually no headlines relating to them engaged in any fraud, but unlike most of the other banks. So the system itself is fraud. The system of issuing loans has been found to be fraudulent. So therefore, they are part of that system. Now, in terms of this whole notion that everybody is, all these big banks are saying, oh, we're interested in blockchain, but not Bitcoin. Because, of course, that Bitcoin is the thing that removes their power to print money. Here are, the people who could use Bitcoin don't need a bank for permission to engage in exchange. Here they're threatened with this notion that they cannot control it, and the fact that they're interested in the blockchain, which transmits the value across the world. This is the thing that they're interested in. They want to take that bit back for them. They want to take control over transmission of value.
Yes, exactly. So the banks are in the business of printing money. I mean, they issue the money. 97% of the money in circulation is loaned into existence by banks, and they love that business. They get huge benefit from that business. As a matter of fact, they print lots of money and then they put it on deposit at the central bank, and the central bank pays them a rate of interest to the point where they don't need to take any risk by lending that money out to actually fuel the economy in any meaningful way. Bitcoin and the decentralized blockchain, the distributed ledger, bank can use to extract wealth without taking risk as part of their rentier model, and therefore they don't like Bitcoin. But they will use the core technology of the blockchain to reduce their costs down to zero. Will they pass the cost savings on to consumers? The history tells us the answer is no. They would simply use that to give themselves more bonuses. As a matter of fact, they would probably fire lots of people. All the people that are involved in accounting all over the world for a large bank would be fired, because they'd say, well, you're redundant because now we have a blockchain to take care of all this accounting. We don't need you anymore. So they'll just fire lots of people. They'll take all the money that they would have paid out in salaries. They'll take all the fees that they would have paid out, and they'll keep it for themselves. And they'll use that money to, I don't know, influence politicians to bring in more laws to deregulate the business even further, to make it easier to co-opt and take even more money.
Yeah, so remember, JP Morgan is one of the biggest banks in the world. Jamie Dimon is a billionaire who heads that bank. He recently said, Bitcoin will eat our lunch. So we see also this week in the United Kingdom, regulators were warning banks that basically fintech, all the cryptocurrencies, all the new entrepreneurs, all the new companies emerging out innovate at all. Here's a guy, head of innovation, and what he's doing is trying to take something from somebody else that has been innovated. It's not innovating themselves. Basically, they've come too late to this. They're trying to take out the bit that they get to control right now. They get to control value. They get to take a cut of every single transaction on Earth. They churn. Remember, churn is the process of banking. That's how they take their cut. their seigniorage of the printing the money. Now, also, I want to look at this element of this notion that somehow some Bitcoins are used for illicit activities, and therefore Bitcoin is not something we want any association with. Here's from a banker. You know, forget the name of the bank because all the banks are part of the same system. And that system, according to a 2009 headline, we covered this on the Keiser report at the time, drug money saved banks in global crisis, claims UN advisor. Antonio Maria Costa, head of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, said he has seen evidence that the proceeds of organized crime were, quote, the only liquid investment capital available to some banks on the brink of collapse last year, 2008. He said that a majority of the $352 billion of drugs profits was absorbed into the economic system as a
the reason why Bitcoin cannot be trusted, and yet nobody has laundered money or fostered drug use more than these big banks. They are, by definition, the reason you have a global drug trade is because they offer the money laundering services through all their affiliates and associations through the global banking cartel. I mean, it's like standing in front of the entire tunnel that would be packed to the rafters with cocaine and saying, what cocaine? I don't see any cocaine. I mean, they are cocaine.
Well, HSBC, for example, settled with the U.S. Department of Justice recently, and what it found is that they had laundered $8 billion of drug money for, I think it was the Sinaloa cartel, which is much less than what Wachovia admitted to, which was 300 and something billion for the same cartels in Mexico. But what HSBC did, according to the Department of Justice, was they actually created specific boxes built for the money that was coming from the drug cartels. That is in the meat space. Outside of crypto world, that is the block size argument. They were creating a block size unique to HSBC clients. Therefore, this is an issue that is so ridiculous to even argue for this.
Yeah, I mean,
ABN AMRO's have.
To claim that they are concerned about the drug trade is ludicrous, because clearly they are the drug trade. They're the only thing they're concerned about is competition. They don't want competition in the money issuance business.
And the fact that they talk about blockchain all the time suggests this is the point.
Yeah, remember, when you have money on a blockchain and Bitcoin, when you have money in Bitcoin, it's your money. You have control of that money. When you put money into a bank, by definition, you no longer control that money. It's the bank's money. So if you want to go to a future where you have control over your money, there's only one possible way to go, and that would be using Bitcoin.
So you mentioned that banks print 97% of all money. They create 97% of all money through loans. In the United Kingdom, 85% of those loans are to mortgage holders. So here we have an entire property market in London that is apparently laundering for the drug cartels as well. So
that's an amazing statistic, because the entire run-up in property prices is so tenuous and on such a precipice of collapse that it's frightening.
Well, here is the headline from July of this year. Foreign criminals use London housing markets to launder billions of pounds. Corporations, usually based in offshore tax havens, are sometimes used by buyers keen to hide ownership of assets, says National Crime Agency spokesman. Foreign criminals are using the London housing market to launder billions of pounds, pushing up house prices for domestic buyers, a senior police officer has warned. Donald Toon, the director of economic crime at the National Crime Agency, spoke after a spike in receipts from a tax on homes bought up by companies, trusts, and investment funds rather than individuals. The government of the United Kingdom, the Treasury, made £142 million this year since that was introduced. So here we have a senior police officer saying that most of this is from drug money laundering here in the United Kingdom, driving up prices. Then the banks come in, issue loans to British taxpayers, British citizens and residents. They issue loans, thus providing the way, unknowingly or not, unwittingly or not, to launder these proceeds, to sell this. They come in, buy this huge property, 10 million pounds, then some pensioner comes in with their big pension funds that they've got to cash in from this April. They buy it up, they launder the money for them.
That's amazing, because now the pensions schemes in the UK have the ability to buy into these buy-to-let schemes, and what you're saying is that it's mostly used for drug money laundering now.
Well, this is not what I'm saying. I'm only repeating what I have read right here in this headline from The Guardian. That a senior police officer for the National Crime Agency has said that this is mostly from illicit, what does he say? He says it's from money laundering. So from various criminal entities, we're laundering the money. So ABN AMRO, the spokesperson in innovation, would therefore have to say that we are no longer going to be in the mortgage market. Because if we are issuing mortgages, we are basically participating in laundering this money.
Jesus! It reminds me of the opium wars. Remember? You know, that the UK was selling opium to the Chinese to try to rectify their trade imbalance. They had no problem with getting millions of Chinese people hooked on opium. Here they have no problem using their housing market as a money laundering service for drug cartels vis-a-vis the cocaine market. So I guess that's the privilege of empire. You get to do stuff like that.
So going back to this money laundering through property here in the United Kingdom, Toon's comments come amid increasing concern that billions of pounds of corruptly gained money has been laundered by criminals and foreign officials buying upmarket London properties through anonymous offshore front companies. Experts say that London, with its myriad links to tax haven crown dependencies, is arguably the global capital of money laundering. Again, banks issue money, they issue loans, creating money, creating the money in the process of laundering these for these illicit gains here in the London property market.
Well, in a healthy economy, you have diversity. Just like in any ecosystem, the diversity is the cornerstone of its health. So if you have an economy that's, as you point out, 80–90% driven by house price speculation from a very corrupt source, drug money laundering, the monoculture that results in buy-to-let schemes, and living here, you see that it's pretty much a preoccupation, an obsession by almost everyone in the country is this house bubble. You have an extremely undiversified and fragile economy.
Well, more than that, like look at Mexico with headless people being, beheaded, people being beheaded because of drug cartels. Here with the same mentality, you have people being made homeless, thousands of families just in this last year, thousands of families, because as this guy from the National Crime Agency says, I believe the London property market has been skewed by laundered money. Prices are being artificially driven up by overseas criminals who want to sequester their assets here in the UK. So you're causing people to take out 12 times their income in mortgage loans in order to launder all that money.
This is incredible. This is incredible. But we have to go.
Hey, I want the blockchain, not the Bitcoin.
Oh, you crazy banker, you. All right, well, stay tuned for the second half. A whole lot more. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Amsterdam and speak with Jaromil of dyne.org. That's dyne.org. Jaromil, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Max.
All right. Jaromil, we had the pleasure of reconnecting with you recently at the reInvent Money Conference in Amsterdam. And we started to talk about this issue in the Bitcoin space, in the crypto space, about the block size. So tell us about the story behind the attempt to change the block size. What is a block? First of all, to tell the audience what is a block, what's the issue, who are the real players, what's going on? This is very intriguing.
Yeah, there was a lot going on in the Bitcoin community. I think this can be classified as the first real political affair that actually involved miners, developers, and users of Bitcoin. So first of all, the block is where all transactions actually get boxed, let's say. So it contains actually the transactions that go on the network, just to make it pretty short. And the size of the block actually is too small. It's becoming too small because of the enormous popularization of Bitcoin, so that worldwide, we are in a moment in which we can only process up to 2 or 3 transactions every second. So the size needs to be increased, and this situation was urged, needs to be increased if we want to use Bitcoin as a mean of transactions, of global transactions, which has to be debated, I would add. Anyway, there was also an attack that demonstrated the fact that the size was not sufficient. An organization here in Europe coinwallet.eu drove an attack for an hour, estimated, that was basically a DDoS for the whole Bitcoin network. And
okay, let me jump in right there so we don't get too far ahead of ourselves. So you mentioned a couple of points that I want to reiterate here. So you think that this is the first instance in the history of Bitcoin, going back to 2009, of an actual political or a politicalization of the players within Bitcoin. You're also saying that there was an attack on Bitcoin. It was, from what
demonstrative.
Yeah, it was swamped with a lot of transactions, apparently by one group that is supporting one version of this block size debate, and you likened it to a distributed denial of service attack or a DDoS attack. So you feel that this group that was behind this attack with this mass number of transactions, that they were politically motivated and they have an agenda. Is that correct?
No. Whether Bitcoin should become a fintech sort of device for processing transactions worldwide, or if it should be really an asset, a sort of project on its own on which we can run perhaps side chains or smart contracts in the future, but is not exactly the mean for routing all transactions. Personally, I am for the latter. But there is a lot of fintech investment. Actually, it's blowing it up completely because they see Bitcoin as a mean of transactions. I think that will fail, and personally I think what happened also to the blockchain size demonstrates this. The people are not really keen to see Bitcoin growing at the pace in which the industry wants it to grow. And the insertion of a voting on the blockchain was the real political event that I think should interest us. Basically, when there was a proposal to increase the block size, this was pretty undemocratic. I mean, it was put forward by two leaders that lost pretty much of the trust of the community and immediately amplified by the media. But then there was another proposal, the BIP100, that actually is about voting on the blockchain, so that miners can actually vote what they want as the block size.
All right, let me jump in again here. So this is like interesting that every attempt so far to bring in some political organization into the Bitcoin space doesn't work. You know, I think the Bitcoin Foundation kind of imploded, and this other
completely.
Yeah, so it seems like the blockchain is resistant to politics. But I want to move on to some other issues in the news here. So the chief economist of the Bank of England recently suggested that Bitcoin, like cryptocurrencies, could be used in the UK to impose negative interest rates on citizens and consumers. And many see this as a reason to condemn cryptocurrencies. What do you think?
Oh, he's talking about demurrage, perhaps?
Well, he's saying that the Bank of England is interested in bringing about negative interest rates as they're doing in Sweden. So in other words, charge simply taking their money out of the account and moving it into, let's say, a gold deposit. He's saying we should get rid of fiat money, get rid of paper money, get rid of all the money that we have currently, replace it with a cryptocurrency that's programmable money, and then program this money to disappear at 1 or 2% a month. This way it encourages people to spend. And this is coming from the chief economist of the Bank of England.
How daring of him. Well, it's a big change. And I can recall the demurrage was actually theorized by Silvio Gesell in Switzerland back then when there was a war and there was a real crisis. I'm not sure it would work on a global or national scale so easily and so directly to solve the problems that finance has right now. People will find other assets to jump in eventually. Going a negative asset, I mean, it's a negative interest. It will be pretty daring. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not an economist, you know, Max. I'm mostly a programmer and a developer. But the economists that I hear talking about these issues are not completely agreeing on the fact that a negative interest could be the solution. There is an implementation, though. It's Freicoin, who was led by Jorge Timon, who is now part of Blockstream and also contributed to Bitcoin. And I think it's very interesting, but mostly if applied to communities and specific contexts. contexts rather than the whole England or Europe.
Right. Well, the idea here is that all of the stimulus has not generated anything that would combat this overwhelming trend toward deflation. And so the banks are now becoming desperate. Let's move on to another question here. So you've got a dozen big banks have announced that they're working on a blockchain technology. They're going to work together. Do you see this as nefarious, or is this just part of Bitcoin becoming mainstream? And can these banks do a blockchain, let's say, completely outside of Bitcoin? Your thoughts?
I think it's a little bit hilarious. Of course, it's part of the process of Bitcoin going a little bit mainstream, but I must say they are not really adding any real insight. They are not really showing themselves as very intelligent people right now. I mean, the development of Bitcoin goes on in another sort of context, and it's really aware of what is the progress brought. And many banks jumped in with this like huge funding for like fintech research of this blockchain thing, just as if it would be like the last ecstasy pill that to take at this party that was getting a little bit too boring, and they were like a little bit too obnoxious, and they are failing in many regards. And so they are trying to pump up all this like enthusiasm into the last phase of their successful party life.
Yeah,
I mean,
the idea here is that banks are coming to this with a centralized cryptocurrency, which of course goes completely against the idea of having a decentralized cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
The beauty of Bitcoin is that it's decentralized. There is no central authority. That's what gives it its strength. And so banks are saying, well, we love the idea of reducing our costs by 99%, but we hate the idea of losing control of money, issuance of money, debt, and by extension, society at large. So we want to try to keep our control of society, but drop our costs by 99%. So we're going to use a blockchain technology. I would think that when the public gets a little bit more savvy in terms of what's going on, you would see a lot of money flow into the mother coin itself, that being Bitcoin. What do you think?
Well, I think that if we start launching a new meme, like instead of blockchain, like we talk about, it was like 2 years on your program, if we start talking it's sexy as blockchain has been, we will see a new wave of 1 or 2 years of investment on this word, because they're just like hunting for these hypes, but they're desperately not understanding what they are dealing with. And I think that Bitcoin can thrive as it is. It just needs a little bit of a remake on its leadership, because with this blockchain size change, there wasn't really like a process of inclusion for every player and every interested player. Some miners call for assignment from Jeff Garzik and from Mike Hearn, and I can second that feeling. They should a little bit make a step back, and we should all give a big hand to Jeff Garzik for president in the new development team, because he has demonstrated with the BIP 100 to actually comprehend the feelings of the community that doesn't want actually to be so conservative as keeping the block size down, but still wants to have a touch on its progress, and not just like be driven by leaders that almost drive it on their own with this like fork story and Bitcoin XT. They just like seemed they wanted to go themselves on their own path. That's not the way the Bitcoin community works.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Jeff Garzik, of course, works for one of the biggest players in the Bitcoin space. Speaking of the Bitcoin companies and the venture capital that has flowed in to crypto companies and Bitcoin companies, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, and that number is increasing pretty rapidly despite the relative flatness of the coin itself in terms of price. But some of these companies are starting to lay people off, and they're starting to kind of enter a different phase of their development as companies. Should we read a lot into that? Does this indicate that we are heading into a post-Bitcoin world? You know, I mean, is this a bad thing? Is it a good thing? Does it mean anything? What do you think?
I don't think really. I think this is diffused to all the Web 2.0 world, actually. A lot of the investments that have gone into startups that were like cut, and also things have to become sustainable. So a lot of this freebie 2.0 economy that we have seen flourishing in the last year is going to a little bit retrocede on their positions. And I think Bitcoin is part of that, but marginally. Actually, it will be affected way less than other sectors of ICT.
Now, we've got about a minute left, I believe, but just you're in Amsterdam, and I've been in Amsterdam recently. It seems like Amsterdam is very, in the Netherlands, has a pretty good policies to promote crypto and Bitcoin. Is that the case, or what's the current stance in Amsterdam toward cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin?
Well, there are a lot of investments. It's one of the 5 nations that are investing most in research also, in various spheres and from various companies and banks. But on the other side, there is also a lot of investigation on what really goes on the dark web. So there's a lot of investigation. The police has given enormous attention to the dark market, and they have...
All right, we're going to have to cut it off there, Jarmil. We're out of time, but we'll pick it up again soon. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Cheers, Max. Thank you.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Jarmil of Dyn.org. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.